This is Twit.
Why don't we start with the most exciting thing in the world, and that's earnings. What do you say? We'll go ahead and drop that mic on the table. What do you think, Paul? Was this a good quarter for Microsoft, all things considered?
Yeah, it was an awesome quarter and an awesome fiscal year, right? Because Microsoft's fiscal year ended at the end of June. So we have that going as well. I mean, it's getting kind of repetitive, just having the same conversation every quarter, every year, whatever, when it comes to Microsoft's earnings. But obviously, under Satya Nadella, for whatever reason, this company seems to be going gangbusters, and I would say is in great shape overall. I mean, we can pick apart little parts of the business or whatever, but to me, the thing that stood out was that for the first time since this was a business unit, more personal computing was not their biggest business. But maybe even more interesting than that, they have three primary business units. All three of them reported essentially the same revenues as well, right? 11 to 11.4 billion, I think, was the range.
Do you think, by the way, do you think that's intentional? Like, do you think they mix and match the products to try to make it look like it's balanced? Because I kind of think they do that.
They might, but the thing is, when you look at the two cloud businesses, the other two businesses, those are growing double digit, and more personal computing is only growing single digit. So if that trend continues, the marketing that we've been listening to for the past couple of years about Microsoft is all about the cloud will become the reality, right? Where those two businesses will essentially be bigger than what I think of as the legacy part of the company.
Yep. Yeah, we got the infamous commercial cloud number again. So commercial cloud is this made-up category they have, which combines Azure, Office 365, Dynamics 365, some LinkedIn commercial revenues, things like Power BI.
I think there's some KFC spices are in there.
Yeah, I think so. There's some of that sprinkled on top. Yep. And that business for the quarter was $11 billion in total. The problem is we don't know how much was Azure versus Office 365, but we think most of it was Office 365 commercial, like by a great number. I saw somebody, a Wall Street analyst, say he believed of that 11 billion, about 3 billion is Azure. So that shows you how much this is dominated by mostly Office 365.
Yep.
Yeah, and so they like to talk about a commercial cloud run rate, which just means if that number stayed consistent for a year, they would be at 44 billion of their total revenues. If that number was
real, and if it was real for 1 year,
right?
Yeah, it would be quite something.
It would. But you noticed this, and I did too, Paul. Like, of course, there were a number of journalists who looked at the percentage that Microsoft said Azure is growing, which was 64% of some number we don't know. They said Azure sales 64%
Jason, by the way,
over.
welcome to our world.
Right, whatever they were,
of unknown of magical numbers.
I know. Yeah. And then I saw people saying, "Oh wait, look, Azure's slowing down," but what they forgot is, as Azure gets bigger, that percentage is going to slow down because of the law of large numbers, right?
Yep.
Like it can't stay at 70-something% forever. It can't.
I think the issue is that it was at 70-something% for some number of quarters. I don't remember how long. It was. And then last quarter it went down for the first time. This quarter it went down again. This is quarter over quarter, though. I mean,
Yeah, not comparing a year ago, which is how you should really look at it. Yeah.
Not really a financial wizard, but yes, a slightly smaller percentage of a much bigger number is still a bigger number.
It is. And look at you doing math. Nice.
Someone will pick that apart, but I think that's true. And they're obviously Azure's growing. And by the way, for a very mature business, when did they introduce Azure? Was it as Windows Azure? Was that 2000?
It was about 11 years ago. Yep.
So here we have this 11-year-old business that's growing at 60-something%. Like every quarter. That's crazy. It's incredible. Right. That should be celebrated.
It should. And, the real thing to look at is Azure margins, right? And if you look at what they say they're doing on margins, they're up significantly. And the reason they said that's the case is they're signing these really big multi-year contracts. You see them tout this all the time when they do the customer win stuff. That's believable, right?
Yes. Anyway, obviously these businesses are doing fantastic. I think from my perspective, I look at I cover and care about the client stuff. This is not necessarily a big deal for Microsoft. If you look even at something like Windows actually grew, I think, more than people expected. Almost all of that came from the pro side, the business side. Business licensing is obviously huge for them. People get caught up in things like Xbox and Surface. Surface did grow year over year.
Yep.
But they were only able to pull out 2 products that they launched in the fiscal year. And those 2 products were Surface Go, a machine they didn't even design. They farmed it out to a third party. It's basically just a bargain bin product. And then Surface Hub 2S, right. Which, by the way, they have not launched. So, I mean, they talked about it in the fiscal year, but they didn't actually launch it into the market. So there's really not a lot going on there. And then, of course, the Xbox embarrassment, which was that for 2 or 3 quarters there, they got an artificial bump from Fortnite.
Yep.
And
what do they call it? Like some third-party game. Like they never say the word Fortnite, right?
Yeah, it was Fortnite. So apparently Fortnite revenues have fallen finally. Thanks to other games, I assume, in the Battle Royale area there. But what this has sort of betrayed is that Microsoft's hardware business is in the Xbox side is not doing well. But of course, it's not. I mean, I actually suspect that had Sony not delayed this PlayStation 5 until 2020, that Microsoft would have released a new Xbox console this year. I'm sure they were delighted that Sony delayed their product, and or they both delayed for the same reason. They're both based on essentially identical AMD chipsets. It's possible that hardware has been delayed as well. But whatever the reason, this is the natural time frame for them to be releasing new hardware, because they just have. This is how it's gone for Xbox. Every 2 years they have a new console. So this year for the first time they don't, and I think we're going to see that trend continue where the hardware stuff just doesn't go very well for them.
Yeah. We should talk about Windows, though, because that was like the biggest surprise, right, of the quarter.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm curious why you say that. So there are here's the thing that stood out for me. The bump that Windows got was unrelated to the Windows 7 migration, essentially, is what I got.
Well.
Yes. Okay.
I asked them.
That's why I wanted to ask you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So every other quarter leading up until now, at the end of my call, end of my call with Microsoft, I sometimes get calls with the analyst relation department. I always say, is the Windows 7 end of life thing starting to kick in? I've asked them this about 3 or 4 quarters, and every time they're like, no, not really. Nope, not so much. This time they said it was up. Windows OEM revenues were up significantly because of the end of Windows 7 support. Like they actually called that out.
All right. So I'm curious about this because now I want to find the quote here that I had gotten. The reason I'm confused by this is, one of the things, Mary Jo knows this, but in case it's not obvious, people who license Windows, or not people, companies that license Windows from Microsoft don't pay extra when they actually migrate to Windows 10, right? They're just paying for Windows. They're actually paying for Windows 10 today. So if they move to Windows 10 tomorrow from Windows 7, Microsoft doesn't realize any revenues at that point, any new revenues.
Yep.
So,
but I think
this to be happening.
So what's happening, right? Yeah. So
that's
a number of businesses are actually going out and buying new hardware because they have really old PCs that are running Windows 7, and they're like, you know what? We're just going to do the upgrade all at once. We're going to get the new PC, and it's going to be running Windows 10, and we're just going to get it like that. So I think that's what's happening, and that's why they're feeling effect. I'm sorry, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, and they're saying also next couple of quarters they expect this to continue, which isn't surprising since the end of support of Windows 7 is January 14th, 2020.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's a Windows Pro. Windows Pro revenues grew by. This is to PC
18.
makers. Grew by
18%.
It's 18. Okay, compared to 14 a year ago. Okay.
Yeah, so that's pretty good.
Home revenues fell by 8%. I guess it is compared to 4% a year ago. Yeah, so that's interesting. But how do you think this is ever going to compare, if at all, to the Windows XP migration from whenever X years ago? It's probably not going to be the same.
Of it.
Yeah, the same bump.
I wouldn't think so, but I don't really have a way of gauging it. So yeah.
So okay, here's the caveat that I was trying to find this quote that I had because I thought this was kind of interesting. 4 percentage points of that bump were artificial because PC makers were ordering more components from China because of the trade war, and they were afraid that this trade war would lead to higher component prices, right? So they actually stuffed the channel with hardware, and of course that hardware has to come with the Windows license, and so they got some benefit there. So that was the little caveat. That's what I was looking for. I couldn't remember what it was.
Yep. No, you're right. That they did call that out. So you know what? I'm probably blowing this way out of proportion, but I was looking through their 8K for the quarter, and I was looking at the Windows segment, and there's a statement in there saying negative effect against the Windows business was a decrease in patent licensing. And so I actually asked Microsoft about this because I'm like, wait, what happened? Like decrease in patent licensing? Why? And he said something like, yeah, just cost of doing business. And I'm like, what does that even mean that you just said that? So my guess about that is, now kinder, gentler Microsoft not suing people left and right over potential Linux infringements on Windows patents and Android infringements, instead doing deals with them to co-market stuff or preload stuff. My guess is that is what is happening instead, but I don't think they want to actually call it out and say, yeah, now we're being a nice company. We didn't used to be.
Nice. By the way, there is a number in here that supports what you were saying earlier too. The Windows licensing revenues to businesses grew by 10 percentage points year over year. And that's straight up licensing. Has nothing to do with hardware. So that actually improved as well. So that probably goes into it as well.
Yep. But like the analysts say at the end of every earnings call, great quarter, guys.
Is sucking up like part of the deal? Like I want to get my voice on this thing so I can ask a question. Great job, Amy. Great job, Satya.
It was a pretty outstanding quarter, you have to say.
Yeah. Of course.
Yep. Anything else though that stood out to you on earnings? That was kind of my.
That was the big stuff. I mean, obviously, I looked at Windows a lot. I don't typically look on the business side, but we're trying to figure out what happened there, and I think that's kind of an interesting story. Xbox, like I said, not doing very well. Office 365 is gangbusters, and I think you said that earlier. It is still the poster child for their transition to the cloud and the model. I think that the rest of the company is trying to follow now, right? And it just continues to be unbelievable. Like, for example, Office 365 commercial grew 31%. 31%. That doesn't even make any sense. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. And the other thing, the thing I look for, last quarter there was a little bit of this. This quarter there was less. Is a specific language around Microsoft 365, which is I sort of see as a superset to Office 365. And I think a key product for them as we move out of Windows 7, right? Because obviously they want to get those customers upgrading to Microsoft 365, not just to Windows. They don't really talk about it a lot in the quarterly report for some reason. They did that thing. This is beautiful Microsoft math, by the way. In the past, Microsoft has discussed, how many organizations had adopted Teams, right? And usually it's some percentage of the Fortune 500 or whatever, or some actual number. This past quarter, they said that Microsoft Teams now has 13 million daily active users and 19 million weekly active users. They've never discussed those numbers at all. And you can't compare them to anything they've said before.
Right.
Yeah, so we have no idea what that means. I mean, we know that they're numbers, but that's kind of strange. To me, that's the big stuff.